So, guys, I want to talk about Swerve Strickland, and I also have I'm using my gimbal, and I really just want to say to you guys, first of all, is Swerve Strickland's championship reign, was it successful? Was he a good champion or a bad champion? And I would say, unfortunately, he kind of falls into one of the bad champions for many reasons. And I think that, first of all, on the positives, he's had really excellent matches, and the match with Bryan Danielson was excellent. The match with the match with Will Ospreay was excellent as well, and I also appreciate the matches that he's had with Brian Cage. But really, nobody's that he's worked with has become a bigger star. I think that his transition to make Bryan Danielson the champion was like the best piece of work that he's done, really. But I also understand too that before that, I do want to talk about the negatives, and I also want to talk about the handicaps. I do think that the negatives was that he did talk to Mark Henry and a few other people, and he said that he liked his booking, which was really egregious. And the booking of Swerve Strickland was really that he just wanted to show up randomly during the show, and you don't know when he's going to show up, really, and that's not good booking. I think that with Bryan Danielson, you're going to see somebody that's like, okay, I should open up Dynamite, or I should main event Dynamite and talk about my championship celebration. With Swerve, he did not mind that. I think after the first time he won the title, after Dynasty, he chose to appear as in the opening of Collision, your B show. So it didn't make any sense. Like, for example, imagine if John Cena won at WrestleMania the WWE title for the first time, being John Bradshaw Layfield, and then he shows up on the opening of ECW, not the opening of SmackDown or the opening of Raw, just on the middle of ECW. That would not be good. Imagine if you had Gunter and he appeared on 405 Live, or if you had him appear on in the middle of NXT. You don't do that. You have to actually appear appropriately, and that was one of his weaknesses. I also think that another weakness was that he also just didn't have. He also didn't elevate people. I think like the story that he did with the Gates of Agony, that match with Brian Cage, it did not lead to better booking of Brian Cage, but that's necessarily Tony Khan's fault. And then also the other thing with that is you look at like some. Also, there's some matches that were not that good. Like he and Christian Cage was not really a good Double or Nothing main event. That's one of your major shows of the year, really. So there's a lot of things that he didn't do that well. I would also will say that we got to talk about handicaps, and I think there are a lot of handicaps to Swerve Strickland. I think that he was during a downtime of AEW. Obviously, he was post Tony Khan showing the brawl out footage, so he did come in as champion during a bad time when the focus was more on getting even with CM Punk after him speaking out about All In. And then also the other thing too was that this was during WrestleMania season, so I could understand that the company focus was more on getting even with CM Punk, more on ripping on the WWE. So that's not his fault. That's just bad leadership. The next thing that I would say in his reign was that the focus was on the Young Bucks and the EVPs, and they've kind of bastardized the AEW title division. They've kind of been ratings suckers and everything like that, really, so there was kind of a sense of giving that too much of a chance or treating it like your major story. And I totally get it that the Anarchy in the Arena is your main event match of Double or Nothing, so I understand why there was such a big focus on that. So I do feel that there was also a sense of there's also just a sense of of favoring the EVPs a little bit, or saying that the EVP feud is actually going to be like a big feud, and it really wasn't really. So I do think the focus was off of him. And I also think the third handicap was that he worked around injuries. You had Adam Page leave for a while when he and Adam Page should have been for the title. That could have been a good Double or Nothing main event. Or you also had Keith Lee, who was out. That could have been made Keith Lee a big star. And also, too, that as I said, the focus wasn't really making on good new stars, really. What would have happened if he had a match with Daniel Garcia? I believe he did, but it didn't really go anywhere. What would have happened if he had a match with Kyle Fletcher, Wheeler Yuta, and they actually built that momentum and led to something, really? Or what if happened if he had a match with a Kill Switch and it led to Kill Switch kind of having Christian mentor him to get better titles, or even like Brian Cage. He had a match with Swerve Strickland, but he kept on being a loser afterwards. So part of it's also not just Swerve and what Swerve has kind of done and what a lackluster champion has been. It's also really been the partners that he's been with, and also the partners not really living up to expectations or not having his meetings with Tony Khan. Like Brian Cage saying, okay, Tony, I usually lose every match that I'm in. You see how much bigger I am than most of these people. Also, the Wolverine movie is very popular, so you're actually having this guy who maybe people would like to see Brian Cage, do the Wolverine cosplay, or you can say the Wolverine Brian Cage, or something like that, or the Berserker Brian Cage, or something like that, and you don't do anything with him after he loses Swerve, so there's really no sense of also Tony Khan and AEW building new people, really. And that's not good. I also will say that I think the other handicap was that other people took priority. That obviously with Bryan Danielson, we did not know if he was going to retire or not. So he took priority. Also, Mercedes Moné came in. She took priority at main eventing some shows. You look at Tony Khan. So Tony Storm and Tony Khan played favorites. So I think that there was more backstage politics in the time of Swerve Strickland. So he kind of put himself on the back burner. But I also think that it kind of leads me to another big weakness of him was that he was possibly not a good backstage politician, because part of being your world champion is that you are the most important person of the company. You are the box office draw. So honestly, if you do something like say, okay, well, I don't care if Mariah May or Tony Storm main event the show, and you do that a bunch of times, that's not good. If you say something like the EVP's main event too much, and Swerve is kind of like the 9 o'clock champion, like most of the time when he was on television, he was like around at 9 o'clock. There's some personal accountability by saying, hey, Tony, that's just not the best way to book me, really. And I just don't think that's really effective, really. I just think that he almost tolerated it, but he almost just didn't really step up, really, and just say, okay, Tony, this was not right. I can understand if it's a different situation, like with CM Punk, like he really did advocate with how John Cena and The Rock were main eventing WrestleMania, but he was in the middle of the card with the WWE Championship. There's always a sense of, I just didn't think Swerve really self-advocated for himself as much as he should, or he didn't understand what a world champion should be. And a world champion should be that, a majority of the television shows you main event those. You do not become the 9 o'clock champion, which he was. The other thing about Swerve, and, this is controversial, but he was during a time when the ratings were way worse, really. So it does tell you that he was not necessarily a draw, but it's controversial. And I think on one end, he is responsible for, what he did, which was ultimately just, what he did was that he allowed Tony, pardon me, guys, but he just, didn't self-advocate. He didn't say, hey, Tony, you see the Young Bucks and they've not been drawing good ratings. Hey, Tony, you see Collision and there's random matches. Why don't you do the Swerve open challenge? Why don't I do an open challenge if people want to see me? Why don't I do segments? Why don't I just do more stuff really to really draw people? And I really didn't get that from Swerve. I think that he did a good job, but he didn't do the best job that he could, really. It's just kind of like what I saw with the AEW tag team match at All Out. I think that when I talk about Max Caster and his rap during All Out, he really didn't spend, an hour or two just really thinking about it, knowing whose opponents were going to be, and just doing a couple of drafts. It really felt the same thing with Swerve. It really just felt that he did not. He lived up to partial expectations. He's like really a C-. He lived up to partial expectations, but he wasn't really the best real thing. And I also really would say the last thing was this whole thing about being the first black guy. I think that it's important, and as I've said, that many people don't understand why it's important. It's important because professional wrestling was traditionally racist towards African Americans. And, and there's a couple of things. There's been a lot of times where you have black people like Bobby Lashley, who's a big muscular powerhouse, and it took him, I think, 20 years in WWE to become the champion when he looked legitimate. You look at people like Shelton Benjamin and other black people who had, a lot of potential, really, and they never really were champions, and then after Kofi Kingston became champion, they did two things. They said, okay, he's not the first African champion or black champion. We're going to give it to The Rock because it looks good to say it happened in the 90s instead of the 2010s, when the whole storyline of Kofi Kingston was that he was a black guy and he never got WWE's title, and this was like 2019. So this was 55 years within the company. So when you see AEW be genuine and do it within 5 years, that does mean something. And then the other thing too is you look at Swerve's character. Yes, he was into the hip hop culture. He had Nana dancing, but Swerve wanted to be treated like a big deal. Swerve wanted to be treated like a threat. Swerve wanted to be treated like ruthless. He wasn't like a ghetto ass nigga sagging his pants. He wasn't eating fried chicken. He wasn't like, eating watermelon. He wasn't like, break dancing or saying the word nigga a lot. He wasn't being a black stereotype. He wasn't like being R-Truth, who was like a crazy black man. He wasn't like spraying graffiti or other things like that. We kind of saw an African American as a world champion not be presented as stereotypes. He wasn't Bobby Lashley doing something like he was gonna, spank Mama Wayne on the ass and be that black man stealing a white man's wife or whatever. Or he wasn't doing something where he sleeping around with all the white divas, people in the women's division, and being like that lusty black man. So I think that his presentation was very important, to just be like, okay, he is an African American, but he isn't a stereotype. And it means a lot because that's been traditional in WWE and other companies, especially WWE. And this is not anti-WWE, but you need to kind of break the stereotypes. What would you do? You look at how WWE's featured gay people. If Anthony Bowens ever becomes the first openly gay champion in a heavyweight in a company, I think that, imagine if you gave it to Goldust in the 1990s and they made him like a gay androgynous stereotype, or what would happen if you gave it to Adrian Adonis and you see him like put flowers and make the title effeminate or something like that, really. So there were a lot of opportunities. If they decided to put like the WWE title on a gay wrestler, they would stereotype the hell out of it. The same way that they gave it to a black wrestler, I think in the past, they would have stereotyped it. And then also the other thing with WWE is you look at Mark Henry, like he's been a heavyweight champion, but with the ECW and the World SmackDown title. So it's almost like saying, you're not going to get the main event, the most important title in the company, really. So that says something. So definitely the progression thing, it means something. You can contrast to WWE. And then also Strickland not being a stereotype. I mean, the only stereotype that they did very well was a secondary black man. As people said, he was a very interesting and cool person. But with WWE, they actually really just, in my opinion, with AEW, they treated him very secondary. They treated him like, okay, you don't really matter that much. We're going to focus more on other people. But then you have Mercedes Moné, main event of the show. You have Okada and other people. So it doesn't really make AEW look racist. It just says that, we treat other people like a big deal. Tony played favorites, really. So I just think that, what I would say is that, I think that it opened doors. It showed AEW was going in the right direction because, usually Asian wrestler, I don't think they even have one Asian wrestler hold the WWE title. I don't think they even had, there was Antonio Inoki, but his reign didn't count. And then also, you've never had, I think, an NWA Asian wrestler. I don't think you had a TNA wrestler that was ever the heavyweight champion. But definitely when you see like black people being treated well, it kind of says, okay, maybe one day Okada could be champion. Maybe one day Shinsuke Nakamura can come to the company. What about Takeshita? There's other people that could be Asian as well, or other minorities as well, really. So it did open doors. And also, too, to trust Swerve to main event a big show like Wembley says something. I don't remember if they ever had a black person hold the WWE title and main event a WWE WrestleMania. I don't think they've ever done that. I think they've not even had that be like the ending thing, really. So it does kind of show, as I said, that that they gave Swerve a lot more trust, and they didn't follow WWE's pattern of systematic racism. So it does mean something. But also, like, Swerve had really great matches, like with Ospreay and Danielson, and with Adam Page. And I think that that it showed that he could work hard, he can grind, he can improve his character, he can be charismatic, he can do all these things really. So so I think like when he showed what he could do, really, that goes down in AEW history, that goes down in wrestling history, and that's a good representation of a black guy. You don't see him do the Trouble in Paradise to Brock Lesnar, 1F5, you're done. Really, you don't see him. One day you're gonna have Will Ospreay hit him with the Tiger Driver, and that's the end of it because they want to push it on the Great White Will Ospreay. They actually treated Swerve like a really serious champion, and even if they even if they wanted Will Ospreay to win, they wouldn't do one Tiger Driver, you're done, one F5, you're done. Like they did with Kofi versus Brock Lesnar. Even though they did that to make Brock Lesnar look dominant, it still made it look like okay, it still embarrassed Kofi Kingston, type of thing, really. So I think that his representation and the historic things done for both black wrestlers and people color wrestlers, it does have significance, but definitely he could have been booked a lot better. I think that, as I said, I think that if I was to give him a grade, I would say he was like a C- AEW heavyweight champion. But overall, I would also say that I think the other thing about it is I really want to see him become the AEW champion. I think in the next year he should get a second reign, but I really think that he and Adam Page, they should have a feud over the AEW championship, and that could be something, really, really cool. That needs to be the next step for him. I think that putting the title back on him after learning some things from losing the title, I think that would be a really good take, really, like the redemption arc. Is going to be a baby face to get the title, or is he now going to be a heel to get the title again for a second reign, really? That could be something very compelling. And like I've said, I think the way to sell out AEW Forbidden Door, AEW Wrestle Dream, is to do a triple threat, to have Bryan Danielson, Darby Allin, and Strickland, the three Washington boys, in a triple threat. I think that's the best match they can do. That seems the best match that they're going to do, because they're probably going to do Bryan Danielson versus Darby Allin at Grand Slam, and you can't just have a repeat match, really. You have to do something a little different. So I think with Swerve, he's done a lot of great things, but I do think that his title reign was lackluster, and there's no problem saying that. It's just being honest.